for the NASCAR DFS Strategy Show right here at Awesemo.com. Phil, how you doing here on this early Saturday afternoon, man?
Great, Jason. Ready to break down the Texas race for tomorrow.
And I know you've got some great pieces up over Awesemo.com, so we're going to kind of talk about some of the things that you've written over there. We're going to talk about the pole sitter part of this, so people can obviously, if they've already been over Awesemo.com, they've seen what you said. But we're gonna break this one down for you here, and of course, as always, we like to talk about roster construction in terms of GPP and cash. So break this one down for us.
Yeah, in my preview article earlier this week, I laid it all out that this is about Kevin Harvick. This week is about what you do with Kevin Harvick. These kind of weeks are not the funnest per se, but basically what you do with one individual driver is probably going to make or break your day, especially on DraftKings. Right now, Alex's projections have Harvick at 77% ownership. So, I mean, you're talking about one simple decision, and especially if you go against the grain, could easily make or break your day. And I mean, you will know within the first hour whether you can turn the TV back over to NFL or whether you can keep sweating your lineups. So what is the big issue with Kevin Harvick? Well, he's on the pole. That sounds like a great thing for Kevin Harvick, except unfortunately this year, Kevin Harvick hasn't been that great a pole sitter. The first race that he sat on the pole technically was the very first Las Vegas race. He inherited the pole after Kyle Busch failed technical inspection, and he went on to lead the most laps that day. Of course, that was pre-COVID. We had practice, blah, 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 blah. Ever since then, he sat on the pole 3 more times. The Daytona road course, he led 0 of 65 laps. He finished 17th. His crew chief, Rodney Childers, admitted after the race that they guessed with the setup, and it was horribly wrong. So we're not going to fault him for that. It was the very first time anybody had put a NASCAR style car on that track. Then you go to Daytona. He starts on the pole, the very last race of the regular season. He leads 6 of the 164 laps. He finished 20th. We're not going to hold that against him because that's Daytona. And once again, we never play pole sitters in super speedway races. Then you go to Richmond. He led 41 of the 400 laps, and he finished 7th. So, the numbers haven't been that great. And when you look at pole sitters as a whole, especially at these 1.5-mile tracks throughout this season during the COVID-19 era, it really hasn't been that great. I believe, we look at 9 races, and I put this in the article. We only have like 3 times that a driver led at least 10% of the race. And there was only 1 time that a driver was a smash play, and you have to put a gigantic asterisk next to that because the race started off as an afternoon race in the midsummer heat and humidity of Miami. A typical afternoon rainstorm came through Florida, delayed the race for 4 to 5 hours, and then the race became a night race, which played into Hamlin's hands, and he led 137 of the 267 laps. So we have this scenario where, like I said on Twitter earlier this week, it's almost been better for you just to say, you know what, I'm not going to play the pole sitter, and I'll go with my dominators after that. But here's the issue. This is Harvick's best track. Over the last 7 races, Harvick has 3 wins, and those 3 wins have all come in the fall playoff Texas race. His worst finish over these last 3 years is a finish of 8th. He's got the hands down the best driver rating, 124.4, averaging the most DraftKings points, averaging the most FanDuel points over that time, an average finish of 3rd, average running position of 5.9. I mean, these are all killing the numbers for everybody who's been at this track for the last 3 years. Averaging 48.6 fastest laps, 76.9 laps led. Just the numbers are preposterous here. And then you go to the laps led data page and you look, and pole sitters really haven't done that well at Texas except for Kevin Harvick. Harvick has been on the pole in, I believe, 2 of these last 7 Texas races, and he's been a top dominator in these races. So your question comes down to this week, am I going to trust Kevin Harvick at this track that he's done really well at? He's shown history here as a pole sitter, or am I going to fall back on It's the randomness of 2020, and pole sitters just don't do that good for whatever reason. And that is what's going to make or break your Sunday tomorrow.
Well, just looking at our projections right now, apparently everyone on DK wants to go with Kevin Harvick. So that is definitely something you gotta pay attention to there. In terms of dominators here, I know you wrote a little bit about this week. Of it looks like the magic number is 3 this week.
Yeah, I believe in cash. We went from Kansas being a 267 lap race, and now it's 500 miles or 327 laps. So those 50 laps, that adds enough dominator points on the board for DraftKings that you're going to worry about 3 dominators in tournaments, but you can definitely get away with just playing 2 in cash on DraftKings. But one of the issues that I have with DraftKings this week is that pricing is super soft. Like Harvick should probably be approaching that 12K range. Hamlin should probably be about 11.5. Truex should be up near 11, but nobody's over 11K. Your place differential options are all super easy to get to. I was messing around with lineups earlier. You can easily go with 3 dominators, go with some place differential, and I mean, you can punt with Corey LaJoie or Ryan Preece, Ty Dillon if you absolutely have to, but even then you really don't need to. And if you just go with 2 dominators, you're kind of swimming in some good mid-range values. So I'm going to say that probably the majority of your tournament lineup should probably look towards that 3 range just because of how accessible 3 dominators are this week. But if you just want to go with 2 and then add in guys in the 9K and 8K range who you're projecting to get a top 5, top 10 finish, I mean, that works awesome this week too.
Of course, we always like to break down these drivers in terms of tier. Tier 1 will be drivers in the 11 and 10K range on DK, then 9 and 8, 7 and 6, and then 5 and 4. In this tier 1, obviously, is Kevin Harvick on the pole, which you were talking about there, 11,000 on DK, 14,000 over on FanDuel. And a question already in the chat from JJ. He says, I know we're talking about Texas. Phil, who do you think had the best car at the end of Kansas?
It probably was Kevin Harvick, because, I mean, Harvick drove himself up through the field and got to the lead, led the most laps. But just because at the very end, Logano's team had a quicker pit stop than Harvick, and he got out in front of them. Logano is a really good restarter, and Logano's a good blocker. Another reason why drivers really don't like Logano, because he is more than willing to throw a block down. He doesn't care what you think. And Logano was able to use those those factors, plus it was really weird towards the end of the race. There was almost like this invisible wall that just kept Harvick from being able to get past Logano. Like, there was so much dirty air coming off of Logano's car that Harvick could pull up to him multiple times and just could never get around him. It was the oddest thing, and it just shows you why this package is just it's not good for the aesthetics of watching racing. But I do believe that Harvick had the best car last week, and if it wouldn't have been for that milliseconds that Logano had a better pit stop than Harvick would have had the preferred position and would have rolled off and led even more laps that day.
Looking at the rest of the Tier 1, so we've got Denny Hamill starting 7th. He is 10-8 on DK, 13-3 on FanDuel. Chase Elliott starting 4th, 10-5 on DK, 12-5 over on FanDuel. Byron Truex Jr. Starting in the 6th spot. He's 10,200, 12,000 on FanDuel. And then we got Ryan Blaney starting 10th at 10,000 on DK and 11,000 on 600. Let's start off with Denny Hamill and your take on him.
I mean, you definitely have to give credence to Hamlin. He's a previous winner here in the spring 2019 race, and temperatures, they're low. Like, if you're going to watch the Xfinity race today, you're going to see overcast skies and kind of like 50s to 60s. It's not going to be that way in Texas tomorrow, so it's going to be a warmer race. Conditions probably won't be that similar, and I think you have to give some credence to Hamlin, and right now we've got him projected as the second highest owned driver on DraftKings. But I think for myself, I'm going outside of Hamlin, and I'm looking more to Chase, who looked pretty good at Kansas last week, and of course that was benefited mainly from him starting on the pole. Truex really got hurt by having to start at the rear after failing inspection twice, and he put himself in a hole, and he was never really able to climb out of it. But the guy that I'm really looking to is Ryan Blaney once again. Blaney had a super fast car last week. That's been his MO at these mile-and-a-half tracks, is just, so much more green flag speed than everybody else. He was super racy last week. He had that same problem where he just could not get to the leader and move around him. But this has been one of Blaney's best tracks. His finishes have gone 7th, 8th, 37th. That was an overheating issue back in the spring race of 2019. And then 2nd, 5th, 6th, and 12th. He has led laps in 4 of the 7 races here, at least 40, and 2 of those races he's led over 100 laps. Blaney has been really, really good here at Texas, and I think even though that he's not in the playoff picture, and generally the playoff guys are the drivers that I'm wanting to give more credence to as dominators, Blaney is a guy that I really want to get into a majority of my lineups just because of how good he's been here.
I know you wrote about where the playoffs sit right now in terms of getting to the end here. Is there someone that you're really looking at and say, you know what, man, this is a driver that's going to probably have to take some chances, and from a DFS perspective, we got to be paying attention?
Yeah, we'll get to him later on in the tiers, but God, Kurt Busch was running really well last week. He was running around the top 5, and then his engine gave out. And it's Hendrick who makes the engines for Chip Ganassi. So I mean, it was something that was completely out of his control. And now he's at 73 points to the cutoff line behind Brad Keselowski. So I mean, he is in such a hole that he's got to pull just a rabbit out of a hat. He's got to pull something out of left field. And Kurt's been pretty good here at Texas. So I think he's going to have to do something just completely off the wall, because he's going to have to win in order to advance his position. But if we're talking about drivers in this range, you've got to look at Martin Truex Jr. He's run well here at Texas before. We've seen him run well at the intermediate tracks this year, and he's 31 points behind Brad Keselowski for that final spot. So if you're looking for a driver in this range who absolutely has to win in order to get himself into the championship 4, then Truex would be a guy to add into your dominator pool.
Yeah, I was just looking at our projections in terms of this range here, and the one that's drawing the least amount of ownership. They're all under basically 25% to 20% range. Is Chase Elliott just a little above 21%? And obviously we're always looking at the ownership game. How can we kind of take advantage of that? Are you surprised that those 3 are not higher than what we're projecting?
Yeah, but I guess that's so much of a product of ownership. Just, all in on Harvick and nearly half the field on Hamlin. So I guess that's why it's producing that. But all of these guys, like if you're playing 20 max or if you're even playing 150 max, then these are all guys that you should have exposure to.
Yeah, no, you mentioned about what happened with Truex Jr. last week, and I believe I saw on your Twitter account last week that really did not affect kind of your thoughts in terms of GPPs. But when you do have a driver that fails inspection and goes to the back, do you have a general thought of or is it a case by case basis of whether you're still on that driver or not?
Yeah, generally for the most part, and especially if it's a longer race like what we're going to have at Martinsville next weekend with 500 laps. With a longer race, you have more time for that driver to move through the field and get back up to the front and compete for those laps led. At a shorter track, it's a little bit hairy, but initially Truex had no problem. He got through the field, but then he got to a point in the single digits where he just got stuck and he could not move forward. Really last week at Kansas was all about who had clean air. And if you had clean air, then you were sailing off. And the only thing that brought you back to the field was a caution. And Truex unfortunately just never was able to catch that advantage.
Of course, this is the NASCAR DFS strategy show right here on Awesemo.com. And, of course, get access to all the great tools and content we have over at Awesemo.com with an Awesemo Plus pass for a weekly pass for $29.95. This includes full access to all the premium content and tools at Awesemo.com, including player projections, ownership projections, our premium Slack channel, and much more. Now, if you're only looking for a NASCAR weekly pass, you can sign up right now for a NASCAR weekly pass for $9.95. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Awesemo Plus today as you go to awesemo.com/join, or if you're right there on the main page, you'll see Awesemo Plus there on the left-hand side where you can sign up for that weekly pass. If you want to get access to everything for a weekly pass, $29.95. Or if you just want NASCAR, $9.95. You got to take advantage of those ownership projections. Those are the tools that we use every week in creating our lineups. And of course, as I always say, add Fantasy Cruncher to your account. It's a valuable resource that you do want to have. Now let's move on to tier number 2. So this is the drivers in the 9K and 8K range on DraftKings. So we got Joey Logano starting 2nd, Brad Keselowski starting 3rd, Jimmy Johnson starting 26th, Kyle Busch starting 9th, Alex Bowman starting 5th, Eric Jones starting 17th, Clint Boyer starting 21st, Kurt Busch starting 8th, William Byron starting 11th, and Eric Almirola starting 13th. What sticks out to you in this tier?
I figured after his victory last week that Logano would get a little bit more of a bump, but I mean, he is still well within reach. And quite frankly, like if you just wanted to stack the front row this week of Harvick and Logano, like especially in cash, I mean, chef's kiss. That is a great way to begin your lineup. You're getting one of the most dominant drivers at Texas over the last 7 races, and then you look at Logano and you get one of the most consistent drivers. His finishes have gone 3rd, 4th, 17th, 3rd, 6th, 7th, 3rd. So we're talking about a driver that is continually finishing in the 3rd to 6th place range. He's getting fastest laps. He's getting laps led. You go back to the July Texas race, if not for the pit road shenanigans that Austin Dillon and Tyler Reddick pulled, Logano was going to be the guy out, and he was probably going to end up winning that race. So we like that. We like that corollary. We like that last week that his pit team was able to get him in a position. And we can talk about the package, we can talk about dirty air, but Logano did a masterful job of keeping everybody behind him. And if he puts himself in that position again, we can trust that Logano will do that same thing at this track this weekend.
There's 2 drivers here who are starting in the 20s. Boyer at 21st and Jimmy Johnson at 26. Because of point differential, do you like him in this spot?
Yeah, I mean, these are guys that necessarily, if you just go with a 2-dominator build, then you're probably going to, I don't want to say you're going to force yourself, but in order to just properly spend salary cap and not have a bunch hanging out the side, these are probably guys that you're going to find as that 3rd driver in that you're hoping, because of their place differential, will score more than that 3rd dominator. And I mean, that is completely on the table. I think Johnson might be the more popular pick just because of the place differential. Let me see what we've got.
Yeah, he is. He's more popular.
Yeah, he's the more popular guy, but I think I would prefer Clint Boyer in this spot. Yeah, he only has 5 fewer spots to gain, but I mean, you are saving $700. And you look at Clint's finishes here at Texas versus what Jimmy has done over the last few years. In fact, probably the Stewart-Haas racing team has been the best team overall here at Texas. So we're trusting that corollary with Boyer. He's his last 3 finishes here have gone 11th, and 2nd. He's getting a few dominator points in that range, but he's probably my favorite guy in this 8K range to go after if you're not going to go back to the well with Eric Jones.
Yeah, that's ones that stick out to me. You got Brad, 3rd, 9,600 on DK. Eric Jones starting 17th. He would be the next, highest starter here. But as you look at, say, a Jones, a Byron starting 11th, and Almirola, are they more cash game for you than GPP?
No, there's just like, I think I was looking at this. Basically, nearly every driver between 19th through Matt Kenseth in 32nd, save for a couple of drivers that, I mean, you can just pick and choose, and that's like premium place to get your place differential drivers for cash. I really like Eric Jones, even though he's priced up. I really like him for tournaments this weekend. He is the easiest pivot off of Clint Boyer. He's a pivot off of Johnson because he's only $500 cheaper on DraftKings. But Jones, I mean, he's been a model of consistency here as well. His last 5 finishes have gone 6th, 10th, 4th, 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 averaging 15.7 laps led, 9.4 fastest laps during that time. We were riding the consistency that he had been putting up all these top 10 finishes. He got a tire rub in the third segment last week, and that ruined his day. But I'm fully on board going back to the well with Jones. And hey, we know where Jones is racing next year. He's going to be in the 43 for Richard Petty. So, if that was playing into his mind whatsoever about the way that he was racing or approaching races, then that's knowing that he's got a ride for next season, that probably has settled him down and given him maybe a little bit more confidence. But the rest of these guys you were talking about, Byron starts a little too high for me in my taste. I could possibly see playing Eric Almirola because of the Stewart-Haas corollary, and his last 4 finishes here at Texas, no finish worse than 10th.
Yeah, I was looking at Byron Moore from a FanDuel aspect. He's the cheapest driver in this tier on FanDuel. I mean, he's essentially the same price point on DK as it is FanDuel. 8,300 on DK, 8,500 over on FanDuel. But because of most of these drivers are either in the 10K 9K range over on FanDuel. I mean, is he a FanDuel play?
Yeah, he can be a FanDuel play, and I don't know how people are going to approach him if they're just looking at averages, because his numbers here before the July race were, they were good. 17th, 6th, 16th, and 10th, and then you get to the July race and he finishes 37th. So that 37th, consider he's only raced here 5 times, it drags down those averages. But Byron is probably a 7th through a 13th place driver, and on FanDuel, you need those finishing position points, especially for tournaments.
Yeah, of course, we're going to move over to tier number 3. This is the drivers in the 7K and 6K range. Do want to let you know the free premium content over at Awesemo.com today. NFL lineup builder plus MLB ownership projections. Of course, MLB live before lock will be tonight at 7:15 p.m. Eastern time with E. McIntyre. They'll get you ready for Game 3 of the World Series. Also got the On the Contrary DFS NFL show come up here at 2:30, so be sure to keep it locked here to Awesemo.com. Of course, if you're not subscribed to us here on YouTube, be sure to hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you know when a new show is available here on Awesemo.com. Of course, now tier 3, so just the drivers that are in this tier. We got Tyler Reddick starting 19th, Matty D at 14th, Austin Dillon 12th, Custer 16th, Christopher Bell 15th, Kenseth 32nd, Stenhouse Jr. 22nd, Buscher 20th, Wallace 18th, Newman 25th, John Hunter Nemechek 24th, and then McDowell at 23. So as you look at the salaries, let's first off on the DK side of things. Is there someone in this tier that kind of jumps off the piece of paper at you?
Yeah, God, and I hate to go back to Matt Kenseth, especially after he finished dead last weekend. But I mean, Kenseth didn't necessarily kill you, and he was primarily a guy that you were hopefully just playing in cash. And I think that's what we're doing again this week. Starting 32nd, he's got place differential. In the July race, he finished 18th. These intermediate tracks, he's been okay. And if you have the race sheets, the 6 corollary races that I used this week, you've got the 2 Michigan races, you've got Kentucky, you've got Texas, you've got Kansas from last week, and then Las Vegas before that. That's a mix up of the tire package that we've got this week. And if you look at what Kenseth has done in this package, he's got in those 6 races, he's got an average finish of 22 actually, yeah, 22.2. So I mean, it's nothing. It's nothing fantastic, but the whole reason that you're playing Kenseth at that price point is because of where he starts. I wonder how people are going to approach Tyler Reddick after he finished second in this race. Something to keep in mind is, once again, we talked about that it was pit strategy that got him out front after taking no tires. And, that's another example where Dillon took 2 tires. Reddick took no tires, and everybody else behind them took 4 tires. And there was no fall off from the tires. Nothing noticeable, and all of those guys with 4 tires could not move past these guys. Reddick's average running position in that race was 15.3. So I mean, he was just kind of hanging around the middle of the track, and then took advantage of that late caution and got himself out front. At 9,200 on FanDuel, I can see that. I kind of prefer him a bit more at 7,900 on DraftKings. There's a little bit to milk out there with that place differential. But you get into that 6K area, there's just a bunch of meh guys that you can play around with cash that, I'm not going to take a hard stance on any of these guys because none of them really overwhelm me, but they're all guys that you could play in a cash game.
Any concern with Dillon starting 12th that he may not bring you the value you would hope for?
Oh yeah, I mean, Austin Dillon is, he's been this way ever since we got to the playoffs, and it's kind of bit me in the butt a few weeks. But Dillon just continues to be hands off. He's starting way too far forward in 12th. Yes, he won this race back in July, but once again, I mean, if it wasn't for the late race caution and the pit strategy, then he probably would have finished where he normally finishes, which is around 13th. So if we're gonna give Dillon a finish where he typically finishes, then I mean that's not what I'm looking for at his price at 7,500. And I'm gonna say that probably the same thing for Cole Custer starting 16th at 7,300 and Christopher Bell starting 15th at 7,200. These are all guys that they might pick up a few positions, but that's not gonna do you well at their salaries.
What about Nemechek on FanDuel at 5,500?
Yeah, I mean, he's raced here at Texas twice, and his finishes have gone 22nd and 21st. So Nemechek he feels like definitely a safe play. He's not the preferred punt on FanDuel because there's some guys underneath him. But if you end up on him in your cash games on DraftKings or FanDuel, then yeah, I mean that's a guy that you can definitely play with confidence.
It seems like we talk about Ricky Stenhouse Jr. a lot every week on this in terms of place differential. Starting 22nd, he's 6,900 on DK, 6,800 on FanDuel.
Yeah, Stenhouse is interesting because he's another guy that his last 2 races here at Texas are killing his averages. His last 2 finishes have gone 38th and 40th. I mean, so it's gone just about as bad as it could. And that was during the time that JTG in the summer was just having all sorts of issues, whether it was mechanical or on the track. But Stenhouse, he's shown that he's probably a 12th to a 14th place driver here. He ran well at Kansas last week. Now you're not getting the place differential out of Stenhouse that you got last week, but he's still giving you a little bit of something. Now, if you're having a toss up between Kenseth and Stenhouse, I'm probably going to take Kenseth just because of the 10 added place differential spots to gain. But I mean, if you want to play Stenhouse in lieu of Kenseth or play them together, then yeah, that's great.
Of course, if you do have any questions on tomorrow's race, hit those up either in our premium Slack channel or also on YouTube. We will get to those questions before we get out of here on this edition of the NASCAR DFS Strategy Show. Of course, tomorrow is the start of this week's NFL action, Sunday action. Of course, for only $3.95, you can purchase an NFL Weekly Express Pass, which now includes everything you need for NFL Showdown and single game contest formats to get you access to our Showdown single game player projections, ownership projection, and the top place tool when you purchase pass. In addition to the player rankings, lineup builder light, ownership rankings, and the top stacks express tool. It's our best offering ever for an express pass. So purchase that today for $3.95. Just go to awesemo.com/join to sign up for a NFL Weekly Express Pass for $3.95. Of course, we appreciate everyone who's here on a Saturday afternoon. Watch us live. Of course, be sure to hit that like button here on YouTube. As I mentioned, we got a ton of shows coming for you all day long, so stick it here to awesemo.com. But let's move on to the final tier. Tier number 4, this will be the drivers in the 5K and the 4K range. So you got Ryan Preece starting 29th, Ty Dillon 27th, Corey LaJoie 28th, Daniel Suarez 30th, Garrett Smithley 38th, Brendan Poole 31st, J.J. Yaley 33th, Quinn Hoff 34th, Chad Fincham 40th, Joey Gase 39th, Josh Bilicki 37th, Timmy Hill 36th, and Reed Sorensen 35, which I did notice Reed Sorensen's getting a little bit of ownership on DK.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely one of those weeks where I can make a case for a bunch of punts. I don't really feel that strong about just one in particular. Based on salaries and starting positions. So, we're in a spot with Sorensen. He finished 28th in this July race. He's raced this event 6 times out of the last 7 races, and 5 out of those 6 races he's actually finished the race. Which you look above the rest of these punts, and that's something that none of these guys can say. Like, I'm looking at Timmy Hill at 4,600. And he's raced in this event 4 times out of the last 7 years, and he has 4 DNFs. He has not finished this race once. Josh Bilicki, he's raced this event twice, and didn't finish either race. Joey Gase, he's raced this event three times, and he hasn't finished either race. Somehow Quinn Hoff has raced this event twice and finished both races. So it's an interesting week. I mean, take your stabs at these guys depending on where you end up. But as per the drivers that you're actually wanting to get into your lineups and not just the guys that you're settling for, Corey LaJoie is probably the preferred guy. He's only 4K on FanDuel. He's 5,600 here on DraftKings. He's the cheapest out of all of like the actual viable cheap guys. Corey had a good July race. He finished 16th, and everything before that wasn't that fantastic. But if you look in our 6 corollary races, his average finish is 23rd. So I mean, you can milk a little place differential out of him. I think you can make the same case for Ty Dillon and Ryan Preece. Both of them, I believe, wrecked out in this event in July. But when you look at their finishes and the corollary tracks, Preece is sitting at 27.8, but Dillon is sitting at 23.7. So, like, if I was going to rank the 3, then it's LaJoie, Dillon, Preece in that order.
So basically, here's what I take from what you said there. I need to grab my Sharpie out. I need to just scratch through Joey Gase, Josh Bilicki, and Timmy Hill.
Yeah, take those guys out and play around with the rest of these guys. I will say that J.J. Yaley is oddly appealing. He starts 33rd, so there's a little bit of place differential to get out of him. But in the last 2 Texas races, his finishes have gone 24th and 26th. So he survived attrition. He's made his way through the field, and he has managed to kind of like Reed Sorensen. He's finished every Texas race that he's been in.
Yeah, you look at FanDuel. A lot of these guys on FanDuel are bare minimum salary at $3,000. So I think, as you usually say, if you find yourself in this tier too much, I mean, you probably just need to start over.
Yeah. This is another week that if you've got more than one of these guys, then just hit clear, start over.
Of course, if you do have a question, hit those up in Slack. Also, hit those up over in YouTube. James Perkins checking in. Lowest punt on FanDuel below Nemechek. So Nemechek is 5,500. So basically, this is everyone in Tier 4.
Yeah, and Daniel Suarez is 5,500 on FanDuel, which is odd. I mean, I guess this is worth mentioning. So much of Suarez's numbers are skewed by his year at Stewart-Haas and then the 2 previous at Joe Gibbs. That's why you're seeing he finished third and third last year when he was racing for Stuart Haas, and then he had a couple of top 20 finishes in there. So don't let Suarez fool you with those numbers. Those were back when he had better equipment. He's oddly the same price on both sites. He's a guy that I think he's basically pegged out where he's going to end up finishing the race. Like if he was starting 37th or 38th, then we can milk something out of that, but he's just not viable at that. So below Suarez, below Nemechek, it's, you may not want to leave $1,000 or $1,500 on the table if you go from John Hunter down to Ty Dillon or Corey LaJoie, but I would much rather play either of those guys than Nemechek.
Of course, we're here talking about tomorrow's race, but someone did ask if you had any thoughts on today's race, the Xfinity race.
I think it's an Austin Cindric race. So whatever that's worth to you guys, I don't even know what his salary is right now, but Cindric ran well here in July. He's been really, really good at these 1.5 mile tracks this year. So I think like if you're looking for one guy to win the race, I'd go with Cindric.
A question we got about Joey Logano about projected lead laps for him starting second. I mean, is your thought that he could hop out right at the start of this race and maybe pass Harvick and rack up some points there?
Yeah, God, that is one of the concerns, because I mean we saw this scenario somewhat similar. I mean, Harvick and Logano started on the pole together at Kansas, and Logano just straight beat him. Logano just straight passed him and took the lead initially. And this is something odd, but over the last 7 races here at Texas, the driver starting second is actually averaging more laps led than the pole sitter. The driver starting second is averaging 67.7 laps led and 38.9 fastest laps, compared to the pole sitter, who is leading just 53 laps per race and 29.6. But once again, we talked about all the other times that the pole sitter has failed here at Texas over the last 7 races. It wasn't Kevin Harvick. When Harvick's on the pole, he does well. So I think that's one of the other reasons why I'm so high on just pairing Harvick and Logano together. Just give me the two guys with the best starting position. The trends definitely point to that direction, and they'll have the advantage on pit road as well.
Of course, if you ever do miss this show, it is available part of the Awesemo Podcast Network, so be sure to check out this show. If you can't tune us in live on a Saturday afternoon, you can get it there on demand after it's over, a part of the Awesemo Podcasting Network. Of course, also, while you're over at Awesemo.com, be sure to check out Odds Shopper right there at the top of the page when you're looking to shop around of who's got the best lines for whatever sport that you do want to place a bet on. James was once again talking about the playoffs, about the borderline. I know you wrote about a lot about this week. You kind of talked about it a little bit earlier. If you just want to kind of rehash on some of the things you mentioned earlier that for people just tuning into the show.
Yeah. Via his win last week, Logano is locked into the championship 4, and this brings up something that I really hadn't thought about, and it scares the bejesus out of me thinking about this, especially if I'm gonna go overboard on Logano. The last time that we saw Logano lock himself into the playoffs would have been 2 years ago, and in the next 2 races, Logano raced like crap. I mean, he did horrible at Texas. He did horrible at Phoenix. It was almost like that team made the cognitive decision. We need to focus on the championship race. So whatever happens in these next 2 races is what happens. And Logano raced like crap. And even though Logano's got a different crew chief, I wonder if there's going to be some sort of similar game plan that, yes, we've got Logano locked into the championship, so let's start planning ahead for Phoenix. And, whatever he does here at Texas and Martinsville it happens. I mean, he can wreck out and finish dead last in both of these races, and it's not going to affect him. He's locked in there.
For our single entry GPP players, like when I'm building my single entry, it's about okay, who's the top end option I want, and then who's my low end option that I want, and then just kind of build it from there. You mentioned about Corey LaJoy, so I think that would be a low end option that we could look at. We've talked about Kevin Harvick a lot. Obviously you got to pay up if you want to get Kevin Harvick. But you mentioned about someone like a Ryan Blaney. Is Blaney the guy to potentially build, be that high end guy to build your roster around?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And like, of course, whatever you do with Harvick's is gonna be the foundation, and it's not going to matter probably in single entry because if you're looking at 77% in say the big GPP on DraftKings, then God, you're probably looking at something closer to 80 to 85% in single entry. So I mean, like, that might be the stepping off point if you just want to absolutely give yourself a lineup that's going to make you sweat bullets. It's just get off of Harvick, and then you'll have a gigantic advantage on the field. But as far as that secondary dominator, looking at these ownership numbers, I mean, I've already said I'm probably getting off of Hamlin, and then the third highest owned possible dominator we've got is Keselowski sitting at 33%. Yeah, I really do think that Blaney is probably a guy that I would look in single entry stuff or 3-max to really to pair with Harvick and get away from just playing nothing but playoff contenders in your dominator spots.
Yeah, that Harvick ownership on DK, that scares me. Like that just like, I mean, like I get it, I understand it, but man, that is outrageous.
Yeah, and if you're playing cash tomorrow, you almost have to play Harvick as just a block because everybody else is going to play him, and if you don't play him, like it'll be over real quick.
Yeah, man, that's when right before we started doing the show, and I saw ownership, I was like, oh my. And on the FanDuel side, it's not as drastic. It's a DK perspective, where it is that drastic.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Jason. I was looking at our FanDuel ownership, and it is much flatter. I mean, it is much flatter compared to DraftKings. So, like, if you're worried about these Harvick numbers and everything else on FanDuel, I mean, get the subscription. Check out these numbers, and you won't be scared so much on FanDuel. But I mean, yeah, DraftKings for tomorrow, you are definitely playing an ownership game with everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, look on DK, it's all about Harvick and Hamlin. I mean, they're just taking up so much ownership, so that's something that you have to play into, and that's where you go in the fancy cruncher, and when you put in your exposures of. Because you just don't want to be overexposed on one driver if you are a multiple lineup. But like what you said there about cash, like you almost just by default take Kevin Harvick just because pretty much everyone else is going to have him in whatever you're playing in.
Yeah. I to crossover sports, I think you need to think of Kevin Harvick probably the same way that you thought of Derrick Henry in NFL last week, where there's a low floor if things don't go right, but if all of the planets align, then it's a smash spot, and it very well could be another 150 point outing for Harvick tomorrow.
Of course, if anybody wants to chat with Phil, you go for our subscribers, go into that premium Slack account, check out the race sheets that Phil puts in there. So you gotta check that out. Any last things you want to mention here before we get out of here?
No, I did forget to bring up his name when we were going into the 9K and 8K tier, but I mentioned just how in a hole Kurt Busch is and how he's going to have to dig himself out. Kurt has consistently been a seventh through a 10th place driver. His finishes are no better than 7th and no worse than 10th over the last 7 races here. Besides Kevin Harvick, he's the only other driver to have 7 top 10s in these 7 races. I mean, Kurt's run well here. He's surprisingly got like nearly 3 times as many fastest laps as he does laps led here. So whatever they do coming in here, the setup is always good, but 70 points to the negative behind Keselowski for that final spot. They're going to have to do something just completely off the wall to get him out front. And I mean, that could easily be a two-tire stop to begin the race. And we saw this in the July race where the tire fall off is just not there.
Mm-hmm.
They repaved this track in 2016, and you don't have to go four sets of new tires every time you come down pit road. You can do 2, you can do none, because the tire fall off just doesn't exist. So we could easily see something like that from the one team trying to get Busch in a position to win this race.
We'll leave on this question from JJ. He says, on 20 DraftKings lineups, how many Harvick do you play?
That's a very good question. With that ownership that high, I mean, you almost have to lock in Harvick in order to beat the field. And even if you want to match the field, you've got to go. What are we talking about? Like 17 out of 20 lineups just to match the field. I hate giving out this advice, but with that kind of ownership, it feels like you either go 100% or you go severely under.
Yeah, I mean, I would. The number that popped in my head was 13 to 14 lineups. So you still give yourself a couple of lineups out there that if he isn't optimal, that you're not screwing yourself.
Right.
That would be kind of the way I would look at it. Anytime, and it doesn't matter whether we're talking about NASCAR, MLB, NBA, MMA. If you have an athlete that is just getting that type of ownership, I'm always like, okay, I still want to have some lineups where I'm like, okay, I need to have that driver not in my lineup. Yeah, I mean, Kevin Hart may be optimal, and what you say, damn it, I should have him in every lineup. But if he's not optimal, you still want to have some shares out there.
Right. Yeah. You still want to be able to sweat that race.
Yeah, it was kind of like we were talking on the MMA show earlier today. Like, yeah, I mean, a good chance that the main event may be optimal, but put some lineups out there that don't have any of the main event fighters in it, because you gotta have some shares out there. I mean, and especially in fighting, everything is one punch changes everything.
Right.
So, but of course, the race is tomorrow. Of course, as I mentioned, you can hit up Phil there in our premium Slack account. He will get back to you. I will be in the Slack all day today for MMA as well. So that is going to do it for this edition of the NASCAR DFS Strategy Show, which comes out every Saturday at 12 o'clock Eastern Time here on Awesemo.com.